Hey guys, I'm Joe Klemczewski, founder of the Diet Doc, and I'm here with Dr. Kevin Brunacini, a nurse practitioner who is part of our company. He is in Independence, Kentucky, and has his own practice there. And welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Joe. Happy to be back on again.
Glad you're with us here. You are jumping in right on the second leg of a mini series on fasting. And Corey and I, in the first episode, discussed the why somebody would be interested in fasting. And I moved away from intermittent fasted and time-restricted eating into actual, what I would call medical or at least longer-term fasting. If somebody said, I need to not eat anything, 0 calories for 24 hours or longer, there is a lot of trendiness in that. I think that's recycling back into culture that's been around for a long time in the alternative health world. And for a couple different reasons, a lot of people think that there is some kind of magical power in that autolytic process. So the story goes like this, Kevin, you may or may not be aware. When somebody just stops eating and they go into what they would consider a long-term fast, all of a sudden, all the cells in your body start releasing all these toxins and you start feeling better and all of these wonderful things happen. And I think there is some value. I want to tell you up front because I know you have not seen that episode yet. I am in favor of some controlled fasting methods like that because I think there is a lot to be learned in terms of discipline, and you can break a lot of habits, regaining some control by just creating some kind of a cycle like that, whether it's 1 day a week, or obviously a lot of people through Ramadan may fast from, morning till night, and that becomes kind of a spiritual discipline. But what I want to spend some time talking to you about are the mechanisms that underlie the physiology. Is there really anything good happening? I want to chat about maybe some of the comparative findings between you and me in terms of research. Is there really any effect, positive effect for weight loss? When do you, if at all, get into trouble with metabolic suppression or severe catabolism? So a lot of things that we can sift through as we go through this, but just as an introduction to the topic, you have worked in various medical settings, and your academic background now includes a doctorate in nurse practitionership. Is that how you would say that?
Doctor of Nursing Practice is the degree.
Okay.
Certified and licensed as a nurse practitioner.
So tell me what your first thoughts are when somebody would say, "Okay, Kevin, I wanna start fasting." How would you recommend me do that, Kevin, my consultant? And what can I expect to benefit from this?
I would be curious to know. There's many different ways to approach a fast, and however that would be. You mentioned about IF, intermittent fasting, which we won't really go into, but that's certainly one that's definitely the most common thing, at least for me in our industry. That's what comes to mind right away when you mention fasting. But there's acute ones where it's very trendy, cliche like, and just whether it's juicing or that's pretty much it. But it just depends on what kind they're wanting to approach. So if there's religious, spiritual, then that's going to certainly be a different approach versus something that's more medical or medically based for a procedure, which that's really going to be an acute, meaning just a few hours rather than a day or longer, like you would see more in a religious, spiritual setting. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely, to wrap it all back together, there can be some benefits depending on what the reason is. And if it's just focusing on weight loss purely, it's how my mind goes to. It's hard to say if it's truly the fasting that's benefiting the weight loss, or if it's just the approach of using fasting to create a more controlled calorie deficit or energy balance that's leading to the weight loss, which physiologically that is what's going on to create that response. But fasting is an approach or a methodology to achieve that in a consistent and hopefully practical manner for the individual. And I can say it has helped me when I was going through my weight loss at points, not because of intermittent fasting claims out there, but when I was in the hospital, it helped me to stay consistent with my meals, and it did help hunger cues. I've seen Paul Ravella's videos on his experiment with intermittent fasting, and I noticed that shift in my hunger cues and allowed me to focus on being at work in the hospital. But I could see that how having an effect with work. If you're wanting to do more work productively, it allowed you to focus on that rather than to be on the clock with food and when the next meal would be. But I'll throw it back to you if there's any questions so far on or clarifications of what I've said.
Yeah. Are you aware in the different medical settings you've been in, do any physicians or does anybody say to a particular patient, for your condition, I want you to undergo some kind of regimen of fasting?
I can't recall how long it's been in the field. At least as a nurse practitioner, it'll be coming up on 5 years. I can't recall anyone or any facility specifically utilizing fasting. Maybe I've heard it more from like a recreational use, if you want to say it like that, where they've experimented with some type of fasting protocol, or some other experts in the community has suggested some type of juicing or whatever trend out there to follow. And that's usually why they've led to me to begin with, is that it may have worked, or there's just serious issues with the setup to begin with that's just concerning that it should have ever been recommended in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned something that I think I want to key in on for a minute, which is if you're undergoing some kind of even intermittent fasting, it can make hunger a little bit easier to manage because assuming that at the meals you are eating, they're just a denser, higher calorie meal. You're getting some more fat. You're trying to condense more of your protein into a couple of meals. And there is some interesting literature on what actually happens to your hormonal cues and just the underlying physiology when you start fasting. And I would say, first of all, just a review. Our body, 100 trillion cells or so, are constantly using calories just around the clock. Energy transfer is happening. And the first place that we get that energy is glucose. Anything literally in the bloodstream is going to be used first. So blood lipids, triglycerides, free fatty acids, but glucose predominantly if it's there. Then you start getting into glycogen, liver muscle glycogen. Then you can get into body fat and protein. So you're going to start deaminating protein tissue or muscle tissue. You're going to withdraw those amino acids. And I mentioned in our podcast on the front end of this that your body genetically is set up to even make sure you preserve skeletal muscle or contractile protein. But you can even, in the later stages of a fast, you will start catabolizing even the muscle fiber itself, not just the amino acids in there. So think of that as this continuum. And when you start down that road, and I'm talking pure water fasting, no calories. In our first podcast, we talked a little bit about intermittent fasting, and then maybe doing kind of a cleansing or juice fast where you take a shake or two, vitamin type fiber shake once or twice a day. And that's part of that cleansing fast process, quote unquote. And then there are still people who say, well, that the next likely thing in that continuum is a full day fast where you're consuming no calories. And to me, that can be extremely safe because you're not even going to get through your stored glycogen. You're working through those blood products, then you're tapping into liver glycogen, and that's it. I mean, it takes 3 to 5 days before you even get beyond that and worry about anything else. But do you feel that even that kind of clearing out those blood products has any benefit in kind of a cyclical sense? If somebody said, well, I want to fast just 1 day a week and see how I feel doing that.
Based on what I was synthesizing today, as we're kind of joking before we even started this, when it comes to weight loss and even some of the chronic chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, how much of the fasting contributed to the benefits, not claimed, but expressed by doing a fast? Was it just because the weight loss or the calories promoted the weight loss, which improved markers? And I have to say that's probably the case, but if that's what allowed someone to get to that point by doing a fast. However, then, you weigh out the pros and cons with that. But when it comes to aging, there is interesting literature, which I felt I've learned most about this from your past content. But it is interesting what fasting is shown to promote towards, I can't say the word. I want to say autophagy, but I know that's not how you properly say it, but autophagy. There we go. That's where it's really pretty interesting. It's really, the studies are very still preliminary, so I can't really say, this is going to reverse age, and therefore it had in its implications what it may have on cancer or Alzheimer's. But it is interesting nonetheless to see what is shown so far, and that how it is affecting telomere length, and that just controlled fasting of, if it's a day, if that's something as simple as that to promote anti-aging, just to say it so candidly, then great. That's it's quite interesting how something like that can lead to, I guess, a benefit of such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the telomere length issue. I just by happenstance had dinner with a cancer researcher on the East Coast, and that's her entire field of study. Her husband works in the Max Planck Institute and just big medical researchers, and I was not aware of all of the research going into that. But I will say I did also find a couple studies, mostly rat models, where they did look at longevity and for reducing calories substantially. We've seen those studies over the years, but then also even alternate day fasting, and there is some interesting evidence of increased longevity that way. And to your point, I completely agree. It still has to be in a premise of complete health. So if somebody's fasting one day a week and then they go to the drive-thru and get a double cheeseburger and fries to break their fast, probably not going to see those same results. But if somebody's doing it because they're interested in improving their health, reducing systemic inflammation, C-reactive protein, those kind of things, there is that autolytic process where, at least for those times, you're forcing your body to go into the use of energy substrates that you just don't typically do. And so I did look at, a long time ago, I wrote this article and I dug it up in preparation for this, about the actual phases of starvation. And the first phase is described as just the first day, because you do get through a lot of that acute blood product stuff, and then you get some pretty strong biochemical changes. You see, glucagon increases dramatically. So now your body is out there scavenging around trying to get other energy stores, which would be, again, glycogen and body fat and all that. So I have seen clients in their first 30 days of dieting reduce LDLs from 900 to 90 in 30 days. So, and that's just by dieting. That's not by fasting. That's just calorie restriction. So that goes to the point of a fast can just simply accelerate that. But of course, it's not necessary. But is there an advantage, do you think? And you're somebody who's lost 120 pounds and you've kept it off. So in terms of behavioral cues, gained discipline and all of that, then on your academia side, is there anything that you think you could say, look, I as a medical professional, I think there is some value. Of course, think through it, understand why you're doing it and how you're going to do it. Or would you say, no, I think there's probably too many stumbling blocks and I would just avoid it altogether?
I guess I'll start with myself on personal level. I didn't just veer into IF immediately into my process. It was, maybe year 3, perhaps year 4. probably year 3 and 4 when I was, just in the hospital, transitioning back into school for primary care, when I was dabbling into that. So, and for me personally, I wouldn't necessarily jump to the gun of using fasting protocols for, especially new individuals who want to really learn the ropes of a sustainable weight loss, just because it's an advanced protocol if someone is going to choose that. But in general sense, there are concerns when it comes to fasting, and you need to kind of be careful with the tightrope when suggesting this, and that would, of course, be eating disorders or those who have a history of that. That certainly you're not going to want to likely promote that. But there's risk for women or pregnancy women, for that matter. Children, of course, and already individuals who are malnourished. There are I don't want to say contraindications, because it's not really that, but precautions you're going to want to watch if you're going to suggest something in individuals who fall under those I can't think of the term, context. But to wrap it back to the concept of how fasting can help with longevity, it oversimplifying it, it really makes sense to decrease inflammation, and how just basically reducing work for the body. Anytime if I continue to remain 300 pounds and just having that more rapid turnover for cell death, cell generation, and division, and all that process going on, there's probably an increased likelihood there's going to be a SNP, and that be a predisposition for cancer development or whatever that could occur. It's just if you reduce that ability to have to turn over more quickly, more rapidly, then theoretically, or at least I hope that's how my mind thinks, that you reduce that tendency to lead to a possible consequence of tumor growth or whatever negative consequence could happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, to your point about longevity, and maybe this would work in a protocol for somebody, but maybe it's not necessary. I would love for people, and this is why I chose to do this topic. I've had some questions. A listener actually requested that I do something on fasting. And if you understand the process, so day 1, you eat nothing, 24 hours with just nothing but water. You work through all of those blood product, energy substrates. And when you get into day 2 and day 3, if you were to continue fasting, and I don't know anybody who would say, yes, I want to do that beyond one day, but then you have that doubling of glucagon. So now your body is in overdrive, accelerating body fat loss, potential body fat loss. But an interesting thing happens, because at that point, so in that 2 to 3 to 4 day span, all of that is revving up. You do have some protein loss. You're actually starting to use amino acid, and then when you get beyond 5 days, glucagon slows way down in its circulating levels, and you start to see that protein comes back up a little bit before it starts to dwindle again. And so what's literally happening at a cellular level is your body initially, that first day, it doesn't know what's happening, right? You're not eating, and so you continue to use what's available. Then day 2, you start that process again, and your body's looking for those alternative energy sources, and that includes amino acid content. So you're creating a catabolic environment. Then your body, within just 3 to 5 days, slams on the brakes. Glucagon comes down, which means now your metabolism is slowing down already. So you're going into preservation mode, and you're even preserving lean body mass, which is good. That's one favorable thing about a long-term fast, is you don't necessarily just start losing muscle tissue. But then you get into the 3rd phase of fasting, or starvation, which is beyond that 5th day. And you are quite literally just dying. You are starving yourself to death. And of course, you can stop that in a process. The average human being can live about 3 months without food. But after about day 5, you're just in this slow death spiral which truly mimics end stage cancer, where your body is just in a wasting phenomena. So that's where, of course, I would have to say there are probably no health benefits. You at least want some calories, even if you're on a very low calorie diet. And this is where, Kevin, I would love to just kind of summarize it as a how-to. So if we can give people stages to experiment with that we think still has health value, I don't think beyond 1 day at a time, you're necessarily getting any health value, unless you might have a medical condition and you say, well, okay, I'm not going to starve myself to death, but I at least want to try to go 3 days, right? At least want to try to go 5 days. I've done a 5-day pure water fast, and I've also done 5 to 7 day fasts where they were more modeled with some nutritional support. So it might be just, 2 meals a day, kind of like an intermittent fasting, but a very low calorie for different reasons. I had a class in fasting in one of my graduate programs. I also, for health reasons, just wanted to see if I could improve some conditions. So for me, Kevin, and I'll use kind of a summary statement here and then kick it back to you to do the same. I would consider that if somebody's interested in fasting, you could start with that premise of intermittent fasting, which is to say, well, I'm just going to extend the times between my meals. So I'm not going to eat every time I'm hungry. I'm just going to maybe eat 3 meals a day, and they're going to be 6 hours apart. So breakfast, lunch, dinner. Or you could do the time restricted feeding where it's a 16-hour window. I think that even shows not necessarily to be the best thing to do. I would rather, instead of people crunching in a bunch of food in 8 hours, spread it out over kind of a more natural 12 hours with more space in between, because your body truly does adapt. That's part of what I was describing with the changes in protein usage and glucagon. Even things, once you get past that second or third day, your body's just excreting tons of calcium and urea and things that your body's breaking down, those byproducts. So I don't think that's always the best thing. I think having some nutritional support is going to be better. But I mentioned in the first podcast, Kevin, that if you wanted to use this as some kind of an inductive phase where you did get some kind of a super duper cleanse potion thing, which is full of vitamins and fiber, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. I wouldn't pay attention to their assertions that it's going to really improve your health. But if you're going to cut out food, maybe just like we would use protein powder as a protein shake as a food supplement, this is at least a nutritional supplement to give them some support. And you might say, well, I'm gonna do that for 2 or 3 days, and then that's going to help me through a process of increasing my discipline and structure. Once I've shown myself that I can do that well, then I can have my normal nutrition plan, certainly just a little bit easier to follow. So those are the phases I would go through, all the way to experimenting with a 1-day fast. And I have found that instead of not eating from, for an entire calendar day, because then that becomes about a 36-hour fast, I would eat dinner, just a normal dinner the night before. Then I would not eat again until the next dinner. So I at least had 1 meal that day, and it would be a light, normal dinner, but that gave me a 24-hour fast. And I did that for a few months, and it did. It became, I don't want to call it a spiritual discipline, but it became a discipline that helped me in other ways. In other words, if I can do that, and I learn that I'm not a slave to food, I don't have to worry about those things. It was very freeing, as you said, Kevin, and that, gosh, there's a whole day. I just have to worry about making food, cleaning up, eating. It's just, I can just go through my day and not worry about it. It just was off my brain. So I'll let you finish this up here, Kevin, on ways that you might think there could be some benefit to this, or maybe you just want to say, I think this is all dumb, Joe, and let's shut it down.
So I'm thinking more like a scientist every day, where I'm just so middle ground, where it's all contextual. It's all continuum based on the individual, and if however fasting protocol can help the individual achieve sustainability and consistency within reason, then it's all worth adventuring and finding that out, because it doesn't have to be a traditional 16-hour fast like IF, but it could be something it could be 18, 19 hours, whatever it is. It's just to see how the individual. But while you were talking, it got me thinking of when I first started. There's a few people that actually purchase commercial cleanses, and they want to use that as kind of an introductory when working with me. And as much as I want to just say, just don't worry about it, frankly, just my personal belief on those, I'm like, let's, that's what, if you're adamant, I'll do it, then fine. Here's the pros and cons, just, we need to monitor things. But, they did it, and it gave them a boost, so to speak. And, to say there's any advantage to it, I don't see that to be the case, but in any event, it made them feel better and had better success ultimately, or had success ultimately in the program. And, at the end of the day, if that's what helps, then great. Because I know the things I did in my early process of weight loss, hydroxycut, for example, thinking that was awesome. It was pure shit, but nevertheless, I learned from it. And here I am ultimately having learned from it and better for it because I went through it, for better, for worse. So I guess I'll leave it at that. To each his or her own. If it works, great. But there are risks, there are factors to consider, whether they have chronic conditions or not. And based on those contexts and variables, much like any nutritional program for that matter, they need to be considered and appropriately monitored by professionals and with the follow-up. So I guess that's as Trump I can get for today.
Yeah. So I think that is the bottom line. A lot of people, somebody might have rheumatoid arthritis, or they might have some other condition, and they've just read an article on the internet that says fasting can help. You can't fast forever. You can't not eat for long. So to do something more sustainable, it might be that just to bring systemic inflammation down, it's eat a less processed food-based diet, having lean, clean, healthy protein sources with fruits and vegetables and less starch, that kind of thing. I mean, there are so many things you can do without the fasting part, but we are drawn to extremes. And a lot of us who may have struggled with dieting in the past think, oh, if I just do this, then I'll have it crushed. I'll totally dominate the diet. And again, even some kind of a moderate form of fasting cannot be done in a sustainable way. You can use it as part of a regimen once a week, or as you said, part of an induction phase. But I think you need to keep that in context. I'll come back to the word that you use, Kevin, is to say, this is what I can expect from that. And then maybe that's an exciting part of the process for you. And then you move into something more sustainable, because just going through this series, it brings me back to my experiences years ago doing that. And it actually sounds kind of attractive. Like if I finish this podcast series and I decide, you know what, I want to spend a week and structure my food like that, include some fasting, because I know I'll feel better just with the calorie reduction, the way more structured food intake. That's kind of attractive. I mean, I think I know why people want to do these things, but to your point, Kevin, you just have to really know why and keep it in context, know what to expect, and then know exactly how you're going to exit that and pull the discipline with you.
And that's what's critical, as you and I know, and that's what we promote is, have that transition is just absolutely critical. Otherwise it's just experimenting with further yo-yoing and worsening of rapid weight gain after the fact. And that's what's critical, important to remember.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for stepping in today in our science or fiction segment, Kevin. I wanted to get some expertise beyond ours, and you were extremely helpful. So thank you for coming in.
Happy to. Look forward to it again.
All right, guys. And for all of you listening and watching, thanks again. And we're going to catch you next time. Take care.